Welcome to Foundation and Family, the Erica Diaz Show, where real estate wisdom meets family life. I'm Erica Diaz, here to share stories, insights, and inspiration for building homes and nurturing hearts. Let's dive in together. Hey everybody, I'm Erica with Foundation and Family, and today we have the opportunity to interview Ross McArthur. He's a local investor and a national investor. Yeah. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to see how he got started to build that foundation for your family. So, Ross, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I always say I'm a Midwest kid, so born and raised in Michigan, like a lot of people here. I'm transplanted to Florida, so I've been here for about 12 years. But
I have to ask you really quick, do you know what an Uber Light is?
I do not.
Oh, it's some kind of like light up rock that they have in Michigan.
Oh,
and
really?
My third kid is dying. So sorry, sidebar, but super exciting for Michigan, apparently. Okay, back to you.
Yeah, well, it's a great place besides winter. So grew up there, born and raised, went to school there. And like most people, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I decided to go into sales and moved all over the country. But throughout this process, I kind of had this burning itch of entrepreneurship and eventually real estate. So what's great about sales, as you know, is you drive a lot.
Yeah.
And so podcasts like this and other, entertainment books or audiobooks and things like that, you can learn a lot. So
Right.
it's been about 5 years on the sidelines just learning.
Okay.
And, like most people, a little scared.
So before you got into real estate investing, you said you were in sales. Let's talk a little bit about like
Sure.
what you did and how that transition looked from coming out of corporate America
Correct.
into being an entrepreneur. So how did you start that process and where did that kind of change after the 5 years of like listening and learning?
Yeah. So I moved. So it was really cool. Worked for Michelin North America, a big Fortune 500 company that most people have heard of, tires, right?
Yeah.
22-year-old kid, never even knew how to put a tire on. So
Sure.
sent me out west. I lived in Portland, Oregon for about 3 years and ran a 5-state territory. And anybody who runs a geographical territory in sales, I feel like entrepreneurship kind of goes parallel. Like you have to manage a book of business.
Yeah.
You have to really, dictate your time and how to spend
Yeah.
your energy and all these different things.
You're doing some marketing,
Yeah.
you're doing business, people management. Yeah, absolutely.
Correct. So that kind of got me started, and through that, I ended up working for an entrepreneur and left that company
Okay.
in software sales, and that kind of got me out of still in automotive, but in the technology space.
Okay.
And so then I saw an entrepreneur literally build a business. We started with 5 employees. We eventually had 80 and sold the business. When I started was 10 customers. We had about 5,000 when we sold it. So then I went from kind of understanding how to run a business, my own little territory, to seeing somebody really, build something and sell it,
Okay.
which is a whole new experience. Like I never had entrepreneurship or entrepreneur in my family at all. Like
Okay.
nobody.
See,
And so
for me, I come from a line of entrepreneurs. So it was almost ingrained in me that I was going to work for myself, which I grew up in an office very similar to this, getting paid $5 a week, taking out the trash, making copies, doing stuff like that. So it's definitely been in my blood, but
Yeah.
it's fun to hear that it wasn't in yours.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask, like, who do you lean on for? I didn't.
Right,
Like
yeah.
you kind of saw the success, and so that was my first that second job, with an entrepreneur building a business. That was my first time really seeing a business built, how it
Right.
run, and from very early to all the way to execution and selling the company.
Right.
So that was pretty neat. But when we sold that company, I wasn't quite ready to jump into entrepreneurship myself. So I
Okay.
went to a large multi-billion-dollar software company and was able to move to Florida.
Oh,
And that's where corporate ladder climbing kind of went. So I ended up being a vice president of sales for that company.
okay.
But about 3.5 years ago, I decided, I was watching people make a lot of money off of our efforts,
Right.
right? So I'm working like a dog
Yep.
and I'm making great money. Don't get me wrong, but they're making really, really good money
Okay.
off of our efforts.
Yeah.
And I was like, how can I do that and
Okay.
reap more of the benefit? I'm making other people rich. How do I make ourselves rich, my family rich, and really set ourselves up for life?
So that's one of the things through our coaching system, and I talk about it often that we coach with Tom Ferry Network. They push that as an entrepreneur, there's not always an exit because you don't have that 401k or you don't have that retirement plan or you don't have whatever the case may be that corporate America is offering. But they push like you're already making other people rich because you're getting investment opportunities coming across your desk. And instead of actually jumping into it, you pass it along. So it's fun that you recognize that and you're like, hey, now how do I do it? But the hard thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. How do I go buy an investment property for 400,000
Yeah.
when I've got 4 kids in school and everything else? How do I come up with that capital? How did you start that?
Yeah. So I'll go one step back and then we'll lead into that. So
Okay.
we started to figure out like it was time.
Yeah.
It's time to, so after the learning process happened, which was years, if I'm being honest, that windshield time we talked about earlier. But eventually you come to a point where like it's decision time. Like, are we going to do this or are we not?
Yep.
And so in January 2022 or 2020, I should say, right as COVID's about ready to hit, like a lot of
Before
investors.
anybody even knew anything, really.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so things are starting to slow down. We're like, we're going to jump into real estate. And we decided to be an out of state investor. So we invested in Indiana.
Why did you choose to go to Indiana versus Florida?
Yep. And a lot of people say like invest in your backyard. 100% agree, right? If you
Okay.
can, 100% agree. We love Central Florida, particularly. Like it's a booming area. There's a lot of benefits to it. But I said I was from Michigan. So there's a certain
Right.
comfort level with the Midwest. And one of
Sure.
it you said about cost. Like I go spend 500 or $400,000 to buy investment property.
Right.
Well, the cost of entry is very different in the Midwest to here.
Sure.
So if you're gonna get started in somewhere and maybe fail, right? You never know.
Right.
Why not start somewhere where it's a little bit easier? And so that was our take, right? And our whole goal was to build up to Florida.
So the first investment property that you bought, was it residential? Was it commercial? What was it?
Yeah, so there's a million different types of assets you
Sure.
can buy, right? So there's single family, vacation rentals, industrial, self storage. I mean, we could spend hours just talking about all
Right.
these categories.
I've
So
actually got some cemetery plots if you want to buy
yeah,
those.
there you
Real
go.
true story.
Yeah, so another niche.
Yep.
So
Something like that.
yeah, so we decide small multifamily
Okay.
after all the research. So what I consider small multifamily is like 2 doors to 10 doors.
Okay.
Or 2 to 10 units.
Okay.
And so we ended up just scouring the MLS because we didn't know any better, right?
Right.
And we found a 4 unit, maybe about an hour outside of Indianapolis.
And you could get an FHA loan on that.
Yeah, FHA, we didn't even know what type of lender to use, which
Oh.
we can talk about more later too.
Yeah.
But we just went like, it was like Rocket Mortgage or something, like horrible, right? Sorry for anybody, but rookie mistake, right? So 25% down. But we talk about this with our friends a lot. There's always a conservative and an aggressive one in a relationship.
Right.
And you have to define who's who. So
Oh, I know which one I am.
clearly I'm the aggressive one.
Yeah.
And my wife is conservative. And so we talked about this and long before we made that offer, and then we made it.
Okay.
And it was the scariest thing ever. 25% down. It's only $180,000 house. So 25% is not crazy.
But you still have closing costs on top of that.
Yeah.
So 25% plus your closing
And
costs
reserves and all these
reserves.
things, other
And
things.
you do. And I think that is a big problem that we see in our marketplace is when people become accidental landlords and they don't have that reserve for that broken AC or maybe in the Midwest, that broken heater,
Yeah.
because I imagine you need that as much as you
Yeah.
need the AC here.
And actually, what's funny in the Midwest, things burn out more because they're not used for those months like it is
Sure.
here. Like AC's always on here, right?
Correct.
So, but yes, absolutely reserves, right? And
Yeah.
so when we did that, I had to convince my wife, Kate, like, hey, let's try one. And you asked how we came up with that money.
Right.
Well, fortunately enough, we did have enough to do that one.
Okay.
So that was fine. But if we wanted to scale, that's where some of the other things came in. And so we did the one, and I always say it went generally okay. We're buying
Generally,
like
okay.
Chipotle once a month off of it, right? We're not
Okay.
getting rich, but we're not failing.
But that's a huge thing, I think, to touch on is that you just said we're buying Chipotle once a month off of it. But you have to start somewhere and someone's paying for your investment. And I've said it 1,000 times. You're paying a mortgage, whether you're paying your mortgage or whether you're paying his mortgage. So who do you want to pay? And while you're getting one Chipotle dinner a month right now, fast forward 15 years, then what do you get?
100%. The house is paid off usually,
Right.
or a lot of it's paid off.
So huge difference. Huge. You're getting Chipotle every month, every night that
Yep.
month.
And so that kind of takes us up to June 2020. And so the first few months went pretty well. And I looked at my wife, I said, I want to double down on this.
Okay.
Like, I'm ready. Like, let's do it. And she's like, with what money? Like we have money, but like, I don't want to deplete all this,
Well,
right? Like,
sure.
what are we going to do? And that's a big risk. And I said, one, let me go find the best deals I can find. So I originally came from direct, essentially to consumer marketing. That
Okay.
was a lot of my background, software side. And so I figured out like, hey, there's software systems, there's data. Let's go talk to these people directly and try to buy these investment properties without them being listed.
Right.
And let's try to buy them for 25 to 35% off what I think they're worth.
Okay.
And so we did, and we bought 2. But how we got those is we used a HELOC loan at the time. So we
So you leveraged your personal residence, which
yes.
is very scary in my opinion. So how did you talk the conservative wife into leveraging your homestead?
Yeah, so we were pretty conservative when we bought. We bought right when we bought well. Let's see, almost 7 years ago now. So you
Okay.
know what Florida's done in the last few
So
years,
you had
particularly
plenty of
plenty of
space in
equity, and
there.
we didn't take all of it.
Okay.
And we also were double paying our mortgage anyway. We
Okay.
doubled up our mortgage payment, so we're pretty conservative, low debt across all. Which is funny that you'll find out that I love max debt on real estate.
Okay.
Again, another topic for maybe later or another day. But so what we ended up doing is we pulled $150,000 off,
Okay.
and we went and bought those two properties cash.
You bought two duplexes for $150,000 in the Midwest, which
Correct.
is kind of unheard of in Central Florida.
Yeah,
So I guess I understand why investing somewhere else might be a good idea
might
as you
be.
get the start going.
Correct.
Okay, so tell me about those two duplexes.
Yeah, so they're relatively stable. They're real estate, especially investment properties, are kind of classified like A to whatever, right?
Yeah.
The lowest grade in the slums of whatever, and that's
Right.
usually a D or an F, E or F. And so I'd say these are C plus to B minus properties, even B plus properties.
How do you feel like it's going with managing from afar? Because you're
Yeah.
not in the backyard.
No.
You're not driving by. If the AC or the heat in this case breaks, you've got to deploy a property manager
Yeah.
or something of that.
Yeah, so we then use third-party property management.
Okay.
So we only had the 4 and then 2 more, so that would be 8 total units. It really didn't make sense to self-manage. And by the
And
way,
they're cash flowing at nearly 100% at this point. Not really,
well,
but
yeah,
close.
we'll find out. So I refi those
Okay.
immediately.
Okay. So
So
they're
we'll
not
get
cash flowing at
yeah.
100% anymore.
So, but you asked about management, so we'll talk
Yep.
about that real
Yep.
briefly.
And my ADHD kicks in hard. So keep me on track. We're doing good. Let's
You're
go to the
good.
management.
So we use third-party management, and I'm a big people process technology person.
Okay.
So, one is if you ever want to self-manage, you're just, in my opinion, asking for short and long-term headache.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of personal management.
Yeah.
Personally. We have a management company within HomeVest and we refer to it heavily.
Yeah, so we went third-party management right away.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right away. It was for us, we wanted to treat it as a business, not a hobby.
Correct.
And so we're a big believer on that. So we use that. But after we set up all those processes and found the right property management company that we felt comfortable with, we were going to decide to scale. And part of that scaling was, I mentioned this Rocket Mortgage or whatever the big commercial lender was. Well, we've decided let's find the credit unions, let's find those local banks, and let's find the best lending terms we can. So what we found was that we found a lender that could essentially allow us to buy cash and refi that property day one. No seasoning period. So anybody who's listening, a lot of banks require a 6-month, a 9-month, a 12-month seasoning
Right.
period. None. Day one. So what I was doing was I would buy cash.
Okay.
I'd take that same $150,000, buy cash, turn around, go to the bank, load their lips before I even closed, give them all the paperwork. And I tapped the table for anyone who's listening, and I'm probably going to get yelled at.
Just a little bit.
And what we did was because I knew I bought it at 25 to, maybe even
You had the
50% less,
equity there.
we had the equity. So we
Right.
got all our money back,
Right.
and then we would go do it again.
Right.
And we'd go do it again. So our first year goal, again, we all have goals, right? I'm sure if I looked around the office here, you guys have goals written on the wall somewhere.
They
right?
are everywhere.
So our goal was 10 units. That was it.
In
10
the
units
first year.
First year.
That seems pretty aggressive.
We did 50.
Oh, that
Yeah,
seems very
so
aggressive.
because of this rinse and velocity of money, which I'm a huge proponent of understanding and implementing. And so, then we're like, okay, well, how do we go faster? Right. Because
Okay.
eventually you're like, let's scale. And so we tapped into a 401k loan. For anybody who's never tapped into that, that is one of the best resources, in my opinion.
Just want to add, you need to pay your taxes if you take a loan out on it. Or actually, you know what? I'm not going to add any of that. Talk to your CPA.
Yes, 100%. But generally what it is your 401k is loaning Ross McArthur money.
Right.
And you pay your 401k back.
Right.
And so most of us, especially in a lot of our age groups, right, aren't quite ready to tap into that anyway. So
Right.
it's sitting out there and you can leverage. And so we did that. My
Right.
wife and I did.
So funny story. It wasn't so funny like, haha. We did similarly, but we took a hardship withdrawal to buy a primary. And when we did that, I didn't even think about the tax implication and it nailed us pretty hard. But since learning that there's obviously ways to avoid that and not have the tax implication and then put that money to use for you, so it is a good alternative. And we talk about it with our clients regularly. From my experience, though, we do have that conversation about a hardship withdrawal and what the tax implication is and make sure that you are claiming that money and filing
Yep. So
because
there's
it
a
was not
hardship
fun.
and then there's just a loan. So there
Right.
are different too. So anybody who's
Right.
listening, you can Google and learn all about that. We're not going to educate you
No.
here, like you said, a CPA
Yeah.
conversation. But so we got to 50 and then our year two goal was 50, but we really started implementing this money. And so we were able to get to 150 rental units in less than 2 years.
Wow.
So we scaled
Wow.
very, very quickly, which was, there sounds like a lot, but that's about $7 million of real estate.
What do you think your occupancy rate is at the 150 unit? Because now we've grown even more than that,
Yep.
correct? So at the 150, now you're no longer in corporate America. You're just with the 150 units. What's your vacancy? Because that seems scary too, especially when you're leveraging near max debt on these assets, which means you're paying a mortgage on these. So you
Yes.
need the rent to come in. And I'm kind of breaking it down for the lay person that might be listening. So what is your occupancy rate and what is your vacancy rate? Because you don't want to be vacant for too long because now you're coming out of pocket for some of these
Yep. In that
expenses.
small multifamily category, we were probably averaged around 8%, which is a little bit higher than we'd like to see industry average. But some of that is you're buying these, let's just call mom and pop rentals, and you're
Okay.
putting some work into them, right? So maybe you're evicting somebody, you're putting
Yeah.
some work into them, you're what we call stabilizing them,
Right.
right? So we're a little bit higher then. So I think the other thing is I'm still doing this while I'm at corporate America.
Oh,
I have not
wait.
left
I
yet.
didn't realize that.
Yeah. So
Okay.
what's really crazy, and that's why, a lot of people want to talk to us about investing or diversification. They're like, I want to quit my job. Like that wasn't my goal.
Yeah, I did not quit. This was going for probably 2 years before
Yeah.
I quit, and I was making well into the six-figure range just by doing real estate prior to leaving corporate America and saying, "Let's go." So
Yeah.
I mean, I burned it at both ends and had 3 small babies. So it can be done. It's just hard.
It's hard. just say like, don't do it till you're ready, right? Until you're
Yeah.
100% ready, and you're never 100%
Yeah.
ready. So we did that, but in the midst of all this, when I was doing this direct to seller stuff, we were finding single families. So I mentioned that we really started in small multifamily, but we started finding these single families, and they were, again, Midwest kind of dilapidated houses. Like some of the stuff we're buying for like 22,000, which is unheard of, right?
Right.
Like that's a car.
Right.
Like, in a lot of ways. So, but I'd pass on them, or I would, what's called wholesaling. It's a different conversation for a different day too. But essentially, I would then resell that property to somebody else. And so, at that moment in time, I was like, well, I'm passing a business here. Like, people flip houses. Like, I'm as smart as these people. Like, I can
Right.
figure this out. And so, I convinced Kate again, a lot of convincing of Kate, convincing Kate again that let's try to flip a house. And I said this entire 2 year process of buying these rentals, I said I'd never flip a house.
Okay.
So we did one, got taken advantage of a little bit, but we made, we made good money.
Okay.
We made,
You bought it for 22,000?
So that one, that our very first flip is we bought it for 35.
Okay.
We put 45 into it.
Wow.
And we sold it for 125.
Okay.
So yep, minus 10% of realtor fees and holding
Right.
costs, we did pretty good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
And how long did you have the asset?
90 days or less.
Okay. So that's pretty good rate of return on a 90-day hold.
Yeah, you can't beat it, right?
Right.
And so we're
I
like,
don't think you're getting that in your bank account.
no,
Correct.
no. I mean, that's that's a 3x your money essentially. So, but we did one, and then I was like, well, we have another one. Let's try this again. She's like, are you looking for punishment? Like this sounds awful. Like that was a horrible experience. I said it was horrible
Kate
because
and my husband would be best friends.
yes,
We
it's
would be
horrible
best
because
friends.
people, right?
Yeah.
People make your business hard, my business hard, everyone's
Yep.
business hard. Like
Yep.
when they're awesome and you love
Yep.
them, and where they're not a good fit, you want to murder them.
Yep.
Let's just be honest.
Yep.
And so I fired that crew who also tried to eventually steal from us, but I fired that crew and I landed on another crew finally. And that crew now does about 25 flips for us a year.
Okay.
So
And
we've scaled that business. So we kind of had the small multifamily going and
The
the
flips.
flips, but still working corporate America at this point.
so can we circle back to that?
Sure.
You have a crew working for you out of state and you're scaling the business and they're stealing from you. That's real life. I
Real
mean,
life.
I have it here last week and I'm with my finger on the pulse and I had it here. So how do you manage that and mitigate the risk so that you know that this is going on and how can you cut the bleeding before it tanks you?
Yeah. So the first one was Midwest again. So what do Midwest people are? They're trusting and generally trusting people. And so I was naive, for lack of a better word. Hindsight's 2020. And I learned a lot. So one of the things was I just trusted that certain things were getting done at milestones before I'd send money, And so now fast forward, a lot of mistakes then. Now it's on a draw schedule. So every project is quoted up front. So
Right.
here's exactly what we're doing. Here's your all-in cost. It's roughly going to take us 6 or 8 weeks or whatever the time frame
Right.
is from start to finish. And then there's a draw schedule. So
Okay.
generally broken down 3 or 4 draws per project.
Now, are you flying up there?
No, so that goes to phase two of that. So that's kind of upfront. So
Okay.
then phase two is I partner with a local realtor and broker,
Okay.
and she sells all of our houses, and she goes and checks on them
Got it.
routinely, generally once a week for me. Also, the contractor sends me weekly pictures and updates of what has been happening at the house,
Okay.
along with videos. So none of that was done up front.
Gosh.
And so, is it the guy who stole from me's fault or my fault? It's
Well,
probably, I
it's
mean,
yours,
both, but it's my
but yeah, but that as a society, we are a reactive society, not a proactive society.
Couldn't agree
So
more.
like that, it just is part of our DNA, right?
Yep.
So, but ultimately, it's up to us. So now, fast forward, where are you at today
Yeah.
with your investing, and are you still in corporate America? Because we haven't gotten to that. So,
Yeah.
have you left corporate America?
Yes.
Okay.
How we got there. So I left in, let's see, March of 23. So I'm just over 9 months now,
Wow.
not in corporate America. And so you mentioned burning the candle on both ends is eventually what happened.
Yeah.
And so me and a good buddy of mine who's a neighbor, Stan Remling, we in 2022 said, hey, like we're both kind of doing similar things because he works for Disney and buying some real estate in the same areas we were as buddies. And so I was like, how do we, again, we're buying like duplexes and fourplexes and they're like, okay, but like, how do we go big?
Right.
Like 20, 50, 100 unit properties.
How do you scale?
Yeah. How do you scale? And so I was like, well, let's just start a company that focuses on that. Duh. Simple. Sounds so easy. And so we did, and that idea was born in early 2022, but it took time to find like what type of assets, what type
Right.
of lenders, insurance brokers that specialize in that, real estate brokers who for acquisitions, because most
Right.
of those aren't off market, most of those hit the market,
Right.
but you can find them, before they actually hit the market through the broker. And so we decided like, all right, let's do this. Well, and then in September 2023, we bought our first or 2022, we bought our first property.
Okay.
And since then, we bought about 700 units
Wow.
and about $45 million of real estate. So as that was starting to ramp up, it was time to finally leave corporate America.
Yeah, but I think the average person might feel that that's incredibly overwhelming at,
It is.
I feel like that's a lot. Like, I know that I'm a little type A and a high D, very driver.
Yes.
So I can handle a lot. But even last night, literally, I was sowing seeds in my kitchen for the garden. And my husband looked at me and said, do you never want to do you just always want to do something? And I was like, listen, we're just going to have a garden. He was like, and this, and this, and this. And I was like, what are we doing right now?
Yeah.
We're just like staring at the TV. Like, what are we doing? And he was like, oh, how dare we stare at the TV? So I think
This dynamic's got to be awesome. You have a
Uh,
dynamic like me and my wife.
yeah, but the funny thing is, he's in radio, so he's got a very big personality. But when he's off, he's kind of shut down because he's so on. So, but it's just funny because I think the average person, with everything that you just said, and how many doors are you today?
We're about 700.
700. I thought that's what you said, but I just wanted to make sure. So 700 doors. And you just really came out of corporate America. Like, that's a big deal. Do you have kids?
I do. I got an 8, well, soon to be 9 in a few months, and then a 5-year-old.
Okay. So again, this kind of goes back to generational wealth and building that foundation for your family. And that's where kind of my business concept came in, was to build something that could be passed down for generations to come so that they have a foundation. So where do you see yourself in a year from now?
Yeah, well, that is such a hard question because if you asked me where I ended in 2023, I would have never predicted that. So it's tough to ask. So one of the things is
Well, I was going to say 5 or 10, but at the rate you're going, that's why I was like,
it's too far.
We're going to scale it down to 1.
So one of the things when I mentioned the company that Stan and I formed, it originally was just going to be for Stan and I. It was not for any other investors, but we had so many people from corporate America and family and friends that want to diversify, but again, they don't want to be active investors. And you mentioned type A and being a driver,
Mhm.
like that's being active. Like
Right.
that's not a passive type
much.
of personality. And so I'm that way too, right? But a lot of our friends, they just don't have the time for it. So we had enough conversation with people about getting started in real estate. We decided to make that a group investing company.
Okay.
So
And let's break that down
yep,
because we do work with other group investing companies, but I don't think we've actually touched on that on a podcast. So let's break down what a group investing company is
sure.
for the average listener.
So we won't get into like all the SEC regulations because there's different categories and
Sure.
stuff like that. But to keep it basic is you're pooling a group of money
Yep.
together to buy an asset that one individual cannot buy probably by themselves.
So humor me. If I said today I have $1,000 and I do mean 1,000, could I participate in that?
Generally, no. Not
Okay.
not with us at least. I
Okay.
mean, there might be some crowdfunding thing that accepts $1,000.
So what is a entry level for you?
Yep. For us personally, it's 50,000. But
50,000.
every group investing company has different guidelines. A good buddy of ours, his is 100. Another buddy of ours, his is 25. The reason why we set it at 50 is it weeds out a lot of people.
Sure. Oh,
And
I get it. I wouldn't want 400 people at 1,000
yeah,
personally, but I think that your average American might have 1,000. So there could be other places for them. But then if you are in that 25,000 or if you are in that 50,000, and if you are tapping into those resources that you already have, like your 401k, chances are you do have that.
yep.
And it could be working for you a little bit more aggressively than maybe what it's currently doing in the stocks.
Yep. And so I mentioned 401k earlier. There's a real reason why we made it 52, not 40 or 35, is because 50,000 is the limit that you can do on a loan through your 401k.
There you go.
So that's why those two work together.
Yep.
So
Perfect. So you're getting a lot of investors that can take 50,000 and then you guys can buy with all of that money. So go a little bit further into
sure.
what that looks like.
Yeah, so every company's set up different. Again, it's an entrepreneurship venture. So you run your business one way, somebody else can run it
Right.
differently. But generally, we sell a certain amount of what's called limited stocks or limited partnerships or LPs. And so they own actual piece of the real estate, just like we do, right? So there's general partners, which is Stan and I generally speaking, and we are the operators of the business, active, and then the LPs are the passive ones. And so it ranges. Every deal is different. So 100 unit deals, they're going to have less equity percentage than for 50 grand than maybe a 25 unit deal.
What's some of the risk?
Like anything, it's stock market, a great example, like could go through the roof tomorrow. You could lose all your money. So
Or you could lose all your money.
yeah,
But
well, I
let's
mean,
not focus on that too
yeah,
much. But the reality is it is real.
sure.
But what kind of transparency do you offer so that, let's say at the end of this conversation, I stroke you a check for 50,000. Then, in 3 months, I say, hey, I want a financial. Like,
Yep.
what do I get?
So great question. Up front, you get a full offering deck, which really outlays everything with the property. So what the property is, current financials, what pro forma quote unquote is, or
Right.
what we think it could do, what's our strategy for the property, all these different things. 20-page documents. So that's up front to set the
Okay.
expectations.
Yep.
Then going forward, there's an investor portal, so everyone gets a username and password.
Oh, and being in the tech industry, I imagine it's pretty savvy,
Yes,
pretty
easy
user-friendly.
log in, and it
Yeah.
literally shows everything you'd ever want to know.
Love that.
And then every month they get an update on the property, they get vacancy, they get rent renewals, they get
So it's pretty hands off.
yes, you get everything. And then every month you get financials, full Excel file financials from our CFO.
I'm personally not getting that from my 401k, just so I'm not getting monthly reports on it. If I want to see it, I need to log in and look at it. And 401k is back from corporate America, but neither here nor there.
And we didn't start that way, right? We didn't have that when we first
Right.
our first property, but we learned very quickly like transparency is everything when you invest.
Especially when you're talking about people's money. It's a big deal. People want to know what their money's doing and how it's doing. Now, for us, it's funny because when our money is sitting in a 401k at Vanguard or what have you, there's such large companies that we're not checking it every day. But as a smaller group, people are probably going to want that hand holding a little bit more and having that access to seeing what their money is doing. So
Yep.
let's say you do the 50,000, you get in, you do a house, and then you want to cash out because you're just happy and rich all of a sudden. What does that look like?
I wish I was just happy being rich too.
I know.
So we don't allow people to cash out immediately, right?
Okay.
Because if not, that's really hard to manage as
Yeah.
you're running a business. So we generally do at least 2 years in, and then they can sell their shares
Okay.
for active price. This whole process, operating agreement that spells all that out. But our goal on each property, it's a little bit different, is generally get it renovated, get it up to speed, 3 to 5 years hold, refinance, return some capital, and then it's cash flowing for life till the sale. At sale, everyone gets the sale proceeds just like you would expect.
Just
So
like you would expect.
it's about as hands off if you want to get in big commercial real estate as possible.
Florida. Now you've invested in the Midwest. You've been uber successful, like the Uber lights. Sorry, guys. But what are the plans for Florida real estate investing?
Yeah, so we love Central Florida. Obviously, we've lived in Claremont, so we've lived there for 12 years now, and we've just watched this boom, right?
Yeah,
Literally in
it
front of our
has.
eyes, boom, and it's one of the hottest places to live in all of Florida.
Right.
And so we keep our eye on the market very, very closely. And so our goal is to eventually roll some of this capital that we have into assets down here.
Okay.
So you have to get, it's a snowball effect, right? So
Yeah.
as your investments grow, you have more capital and you can disperse that capital maybe in nicer assets, nicer parts of the area, the geographical, United States. Florida, I would say, is a tier one or A plus market in general.
Right.
And so we're keeping our eye on it very, very closely. There's starting to get some deals to be had. You just got to work a little harder for it.
Right. And what do you think about working with like a local broker that's doing a bulk of the business? Because you obviously have a good relationship with your agent up there in the Midwest, and she should be bringing you some deals, whether they're off market or about to hit the market or what have you.
Acquisitions, broker, whether commercial side or
Yeah.
residential side does not matter. I think that's the crux of your acquisition strategy. Whether you go direct to consumer or not, you still need that partner. They're going to get deals that you're never going to see.
Right.
Period. And so they're
Right.
going to be able to bring you opportunities that you're not going to get. So, for me, like, you'd think, oh, well, maybe if Ross is local, he's just going to do it himself. No, opposite. What investing in distance has taught me is just surround yourself with the right people. Like we
Right.
talked about earlier, treat it as a business. And so, hey, Erica, this is like, I'm going to partner with you on acquisitions for these type of assets.
Right.
Like, why would I want to go do it myself?
Right. No, absolutely. So tell me two of your favorite things that you've learned that have been so key to your success.
Uh, Real estate specifically is the most forgiving type of asset in anything I've ever touched at, investment wise and things like that. The worst case scenario, everything is figure outable. Like you can figure it out and come out relatively on top. And people tell you that
Yeah.
like early on, and you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you have some crazy stuff. I've had a house burned down. I've had people commit suicide. I've had
Yeah.
drug overdoses. I've had, you name it.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
We've had those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's reality. And if you haven't been doing it long enough. And
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
truth because it's going to happen.
Absolutely. It's humans,
Yep.
right?
And it's nasty. But guess what? You get over it. That house that burned down, guess what? I made $12,000 on it. Like, okay,
There you
that's
go.
the worst case scenario. House burned down. I got $12,000.
There you go.
So that's one definitely. And I think the other one is people with wealth figure out taxation
Right.
and taxation strategy.
Right.
And real estate is, again, you read the books, you listen to the podcast, and everyone says, oh, real estate's the best way to limit your taxation. And as a W-2 employee, early on, I wasn't a real estate professional.
Right.
And I was getting some of the tax benefits, but then I became a real estate professional.
Right.
And I had all this depreciation. I literally paid zero taxes.
Which is huge.
Yeah. So again, consult your CPA. But
Absolutely.
I mean, literally, like people write about that, and I was like, that's not real. We got a check back last year for 100% of what we paid in taxes, federal tax. And my wife goes, did we just steal money? Like, this can't be legal. And our CPA is like, no, it's very much legal. Just smart people do it, not dumb people.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay. So it was like
Well,
those two
and
things
that's
I've
kind of
learned.
where that saying, the rich get richer and the
Yep.
poor, these things come from somewhere,
Yep.
right? So it's just knowing tax codes and aligning yourself with the right people.
100%.
Because I'd rather be a master of one than a jack of a jack of one or a master. What's the saying?
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yes. Yeah. I'd rather be a master of
think
one
that
than a
too.
jack of all trades. So definitely leaning on your CPA or an investment group such as yourself. So tell me two things that you have just not enjoyed.
Well, it's the people.
Yep. It's the people.
It's also the thing that makes you probably the most money. It's the thing that frustrates you and wants you to run through a plate glass window. So people are really hard, and emotions and theft and
Yeah.
dishonesty and all that. There's just a million things. People aren't like you, and I think it jades you a little bit over
Right.
the years. So
It
I think
does.
that would probably be the number one thing is just the people. And I think the other part of it is, and I don't deal with it on purpose. Since all this growth, we've started our own property management company.
Right.
I don't like dealing with tenants, and so I hate it. Actually, I don't. So they don't. No one knows who I am. I am a ghost.
Right. And that's nice though, because I know this may sound very insensitive, but if you are that frontline defense when somebody does have cancer, or when somebody does lose their job, or when somebody does whatever, fill in the blank, then it's this emotional pool. And really it's a business at this point. And if you didn't pay your rent at the big apartment complex or what have you, what do you think would happen? So kind of the idea of being that silent investor is more so, I know my husband's MO, but like me, I like being in the front lines. I like doing all the things, but there does become a time where it's like, hey, we've got to put some barricades in between here, because it does get taxing, and not like the government taxing. It gets taxing on my soul, where it's hard. So what's your one bit of advice if you could tell anybody anything on how to get started?
Well, one is, I mean, read, listen to your podcast, listen to other investing podcasts. I mean, that's first and foremost. Like,
Some of your favorite podcasts are?
so I like Axel Ragnarsson a
Okay.
lot. For those, his is the Multifamily Wealth Podcast.
Okay.
He's just very tactical.
Okay.
Like, so for people who don't like that, they might get a little turned off, but it's like things that you would use.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's one of my favorite ones. I'll stick with just his for right now because I think that's probably the best one. Of course, there's Bigger Pockets and
Yeah. Well,
all
and Bigger
those.
Pockets just even has a Facebook group, which I find if you're just perusing that Facebook group, it's really helpful, especially for an entry level investor. It just makes you think about what wealth is and what rich is. And
Yeah.
while they're not the same, people perceive them as the same, but oftentimes wealth is built silently, and you see like money and flashy, kind of like you see that, and that's really not what wealth is.
No.
So it's just different things that have made me think differently over the years as we've gone through real estate and as I've had my children, and then we've gone through family things where I'm like, this is what I don't want to do,
Yeah.
or this is what I want to do. So Ross, tell everybody where they can find you so that if they want to participate in your joint venture, they can.
So I'm awful on social media. I always joke about that every podcast I do. So don't find me on a lot of that. But where you do want to find me is on LinkedIn. So I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. I just think it's a great educational platform. So
Okay.
You'll find me heavily on that. And for our company, Follow the Deal Investments, you can find us at followthedeal.com.
Perfect. And we'll include that link below. And if you are interested in investing in Florida or really anywhere else, reach out to us. We can connect you across the country with agents or investors, or we can help you here in our backyard. Ross, thank you so much for joining
Very
us on
welcome.
Foundation and Family. And make sure you subscribe and like our channel. Until next time, thanks. Bye-bye.